blah, 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 blah.
Welcome to the Our Forever Smiles podcast, a podcast created to support mothers of children who were born with clefts and those who love them. I'm your host, Laura Arroyo, and I'm also a mother of a daughter who was born with a surprise cleft palate. I know the challenges you face every day, whether you have just learned the difficult news of your baby's cleft lip or palate, you're in the midst of pre-op or post-op, or you're an OG cleft mom. This podcast is for you. In a weekly conversation, we will talk about everything from feeding and speech therapy to surgery and school. We'll share tips from guest experts and advocates and even share a little joy in the process. You can listen to Our Forever Smiles wherever you listen to podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned. I honestly don't even know where to start. This has been such a journey for me, and I'm just so grateful to launch our very first podcast. I will get into the details of why I decided to start a podcast anyway, but I'm just so happy that you all have decided to listen today. So yeah, for our first episode, welcome to the Cleft Mom Support Podcast. I am your host, Laura Arroyo. Thank you to all of our subscribers. I appreciate all of the support that I've received from this wonderful community. Of course, you know that you can listen to this podcast via Apple, Spotify, and anywhere that podcasts are available. So don't forget to subscribe if you have not yet, and just stay tuned. Just as a quick note, we will start every podcast by saying this, every episode by saying this, is that we are not medical doctors. We don't intend for you to use the information that we share here as medical advice. We are parents and advocates who love our children, and we are just sharing our own personal experiences. So please don't take anything that is shared here as medical advice. Okay, so let's just jump right in. Since this is our first episode, I have decided that I would share my story of my journey. Thankfully and hopefully my journey is coming to an end. Well, I guess mainly I'm not in the thick of it anymore, and I'm happy because, as you all know, and I'm sure as you're listening, some of you are in various stages of this whole process of having a child that was born with a cleft lip or palate or both. And so you know this journey all too well, and you're probably in various stages of that. And so I want to empathize with you, and I want this podcast to be about sharing our journeys, but also answering questions that you may have at any point during your journey. I know that I myself had to do a lot of research, a lot of digging. There's so much that you'd be so surprised at how little medical professionals know about cleft lip and palate issues. And so you really have to do some digging and some research in order to really find the resources that you need, and also to just be an advocate for your child. And we'll continue to learn a little bit more about that as we talk each episode. So, all right. So I guess I will jump right in. The topic for this first episode is just sharing my story. So what I'll share with you is that my pregnancy was pretty uneventful. I had a normal pregnancy. We were so excited when we first found out we were expecting a child. I didn't have any concerns. At our 19-week anatomy scan, we got a peek at our baby. The one thing that was unique about our journey is that we didn't want to know what the gender of the baby was until the baby was born. And so at our anatomy scan, we checked to make sure that everything, she had all 5 fingers and all 5 fingers, all 10 fingers and 10 toes. And so, they checked the usual things in her anatomy scan, and they all came back clear and well. We also did the NIP genetic testing, and we also did a comprehensive panel on her as well. Super costly. Everything came back normal on both of those as well. I have to be totally honest here. I hated being pregnant. It was not one of those things that I enjoyed. I literally hated every second of it. I threw up from the time my HCG levels rose until probably the day that I gave birth to her. I literally had tons of heartburn, and I was just uncomfortable. And it was not the experience that I thought I was going to be. I was literally I thought that I was going to be like a treadmill pregnant mom. Like that is what I envisioned in my head. Like, oh, I'm going to be on the treadmill every day, and I'm going to eat healthy and eat salads. So yeah, I did not eat salads. I was eating anything that I wanted. And it was the first time in my life that I didn't really, concern myself too much about my weight. I was really just trying to survive, and I just wanted to ensure that I had a healthy pregnancy. Like I wanted to just eat a variety of foods, but I wasn't like dieting or anything. And I can honestly say that was probably the first time in my life, in my adult life, that I'd ever done something like that. I've regularly been on a diet. So yeah. So anyway, there's that. Juselle, she was a full-term baby. She was born on August 24th, 2022. She was born at 1 p.m. She came out with her eyes wide open. She was, to me, it seemed like she was eager and ready to take on the world. And we had made an agreement that her father was going to announce the gender, her gender. And so, when she came out, everyone looked at him like, what is it? What is she? And he said, it's a girl. And we were all delighted about that. I was very excited. I wanted a baby girl. And so it was, exciting to get that news. And so we were excited in that moment when she came out. They put her on my chest, and I just felt this overwhelming love, from her, and just in general, like in the room. It was a very special moment. The thing that people don't really talk about though is that there's a lot of chaos. Like it's chaotic. Like the doctor, the doctor is like focused on trying like to contain your blood, right? To like make sure you're not going to like bleed out or anything like that. And so there's still a lot of movement, and there's a lot going on, a lot of excitement. So when things calm down a little bit, they move Juselle to the newborn station where they take their weight, and, they give them the vitamin K and all that, the newborn stuff. And so I just as she was over there, I was feeling like relieved, and just the doctor had told me that, I didn't have any tearing or anything. And so I was feeling good, but I just sensed like some unusual tension and confusion as she laid like on the newborn table where she was being examined and weighed and measured. And then I just noticed that the nurse that was examining her, she reached for the phone, and she said that she needed another nurse to come in to like as backup. And so I thought that was so kind of like weird. There was like a little bit of like, I don't know, concern. And then I heard the first nurse say to the second nurse, oh, she has a hole in the roof of her mouth. And so I paused for a second, and I was looking at Giselle's father, and I told him, I said, like, I gave him like that look like, hey, listen to what's going on over there. And basically they said, oh yeah, it looks like she has a hole on the roof of her mouth, but it's okay. Like everything's going to be fine. Like, don't you worry. Like everything is going to be fine. And so this is where the lack of like knowledge from all medical professionals when it comes to issues with cleft lip or cleft palate, and probably even if your child is born with any type of thing that is not, I guess, a part of what someone would call the norm. They are kind of they just don't know about it, right? It's not their expertise. They may touch on some of these things, but it's not something that they've probably sat on unless it's like their specialty. And so we sat there, and so the nurse was trying to get me to nurse her. And so we were trying and as if you're here, well, most of you, let me not make that assumption, because maybe you all are here to learn a little bit. But yeah, that was pretty much a waste of time, because now we know that children that are born with cleft palates have no ability to form suction. And so there was no way that she was going to be able to get milk from my breast, and I was not able to nurse her because she could never latch on. She just didn't have the equipment, right? Like her mouth wasn't fully functioning, so she wasn't able to do that. So yeah, the rest of the day was just a little bit of a blur. Like, I laid in the bed staring at her, and I just felt kind of like broken. All I knew was about, like, children overseas, and there are just tons of resources for children that are overseas. And I never really saw anything like, or any attention really drawn to children that are born in the United States. We continue to try to get Juselle to feed, but she was not able to do that. And she actually ended up being taken to the NICU. When I was moved from labor and delivery to the postpartum floor, I had the nurses come in and say, "Oh, she's feeding great," or "Oh, she's doing well." But then I would have what I now know are the feeding therapists that would say, "No, you need to do this, and she's not getting enough food." And then they tested Juselle for bilirubin, for jaundice, and her numbers were really high. And they weren't coming down. And the reason why is because she wasn't feeding properly, and because the way that bilirubin is removed, or how it comes out of the body, is through urine and poop. And so because Juselle wasn't eating well, she wasn't peeing enough to get her bilirubin numbers down. And so we were stuck with that high bilirubin, and they ultimately made the decision, because she was not eating and because her numbers were really high, she needed to go to the NICU. And so they took her to the NICU and discharged me the next day. And one of the hardest experiences of my life, and something that you never expect to happen to you, or you don't understand the feeling until it happens to you, is giving birth to a baby and coming home without that baby. And I can't explain to you how lonely that feels, how heart-wrenching that feels, how concerning it feels. And I don't feel like anything could have prepared me for that moment during this journey. And that's the one of many hard moments throughout this journey. But okay, so I went home, and Juselle was in the NICU, and she had such a wonderful NICU team. They set up, goals for her. They were really really wanting to get her to where she needed to be in order to be discharged and to come home. And what they say is they don't like you to be bedside. It's really hard for you not to, right? Because that's your child. But they want you to really take care of yourself, because it's a stressful situation. And in order to be your best self and be your best advocate for your child, is if you go home and get rest, and you're able to, come in the next day and just feel energized and ready to be there for them and be their biggest advocate. And so while it's challenging not to stay there, I believe Juselle was in the NICU for 2 to 3 days, and I would come home every night. I took the nurse's advice, and I wouldn't stay bedside. And eventually Juselle was meeting her goals. They wanted her to have 50 milliliters of formula per every 2 to 3 hours. And she was doing that. She was crushing it. Actually, she was wanting more. And so we'll have some episodes on feeding where we'll talk about what worked and what did not work. But the one thing that did work later on for Juselle was the pigeon bottle. And usually people use the Dr. Brown's bottle, but we'll talk a little bit more about that in other episodes to come. So with Juselle, we were told that if she did not feed, that we were going to be forced to do a feeding tube. And that was something that I was really adamant about not doing. And I really, really wanted to get her to eat. And so I was really dedicated to doing that, to getting her to eat, because, I didn't want her to have to go through a surgery, and I didn't want her to have a feeding tube. It was just something that I did not want for her. So we were able to get her to meet her goals. And thank God, after a few days, she was able to come home. So I had mentioned formula earlier, but Juselle was actually on breast milk. I was pumping around the clock during this time. And so she was getting breast milk from me, but also we can also have episodes about the transfer of knowledge between medical staff. While Juselle was in the NICU, she was offered formula from one of the nurses who I guess didn't know that she was on breast milk. So at that point, all throughout my pregnancy, I had planned on nursing or offering Juselle breast milk. I was either going to nurse or just pump. That was my goal. But when you have a child that has like feeding concerns or feeding issues or trouble eating, you literally will do anything that works. And so I didn't care if she was having breast milk or formula as long as my baby girl was eating. And so when she did get home, she was solely on breast milk, and I was pumping. But the one thing that was really hard for me is that Juselle had a series of appointments immediately after she was born because she had to see specialists. So along with her pediatrician, she also had to meet her cleft team. So while she was in the NICU, her NICU team, who was phenomenal, I'll say that again, they recommended a cleft team. And I'm based in North Carolina, and so I was placed with the UNC team. And so the NICU team referred me to the UNC craniofacial team. And so she had a series of appointments like within the first week and the first 2 weeks that she was born, because of course they wanted to meet her and obviously get early intervention. That's really, really critical for, I feel like, a lot of these things and any issue or problem that you're having with a child. Early intervention is key. I know I've seen a lot of parents kind of, I don't know, I guess maybe they're just not as accepting of certain things, or they just have other concerns, or just a sort of distrust in the medical system overall. And so they just delay these types of things. I am not one of those parents. I am someone who is hardcore early intervention. And if I can get my child the help that they need very early on, I will do that. I will do what I believe works and what's best. And everyone might be different. But anyway, I digress. It was really, really difficult for me because I was not sleeping at night. And so I was just a walking zombie. And then the next day I had to take her to her appointments every single day. There's a concern with cleft palate and cleft lip children. They develop a lot of reflux because of the way that they have to feed, and they take in a lot of air. And so what happens is that they tend to have some reflux, and like they choke or there's some issues with that. And so I would be a nervous wreck driving her to her appointments because she was in the back seat and I could not see her. And so I would always be concerned that she was choking. And so that was just very stressful to me, not to mention the hospital and her pediatrician's office was about an hour away from me, and her cleft team is probably about an hour and 20 minutes away from me. And so, of course, depending on what my schedule looked like, I would have to pump in the car. Or if I missed a pump, I was leaking all over the place. It was a lot. It was a very, very, very stressful time. They were in the beginning very concerned about Juselle's weight. They wanted to make sure that she was gaining weight. And so when we finally saw a feeding therapist, I told her, I was telling her the concern that I was having is that I was feeding Juselle every hour, and the feeding therapist told me that I was not supposed to be doing that, and that's basically a sign that Juselle is snacking, and that just means that she's not getting enough during each session, and that I needed to spread them apart. And so we did a feeding session with Juselle, and what she realized is that Juselle was not taking in as much formula or breast milk that she wanted. And so we switched her. We tested the Dr. Brown's bottle, and Juselle wanted a faster flow. She wanted to eat more. She was eager to eat more. And so she wanted to have a faster flow, and the Dr. Brown's bottle was not offering her that. And so we switched to a pigeon bottle. The last that I saw, I believe that the pigeon bottle is no longer, they don't sell them anymore. I can't remember, but thank God the feeding therapist had all of the bottles and stuff available for me. And so I was able to take the pigeon bottles home after that specific session with her. And so she was on the pigeon bottle up until the date of her palate repair surgery, which was 2 days before she turned 10 months. And so we'll talk about the surgery as well in a little bit. But to continue on in this journey and navigating Juselle's story, so she also met with her surgeon, who is Dr. Wood, phenomenal, wonderful, fantastic surgeon, very compassionate, very knowledgeable, and just overall beautiful human being. I really appreciate the kindness and care that her team provided for Juselle. They were constantly, checking in on us, but also just being very kind in their approach and the way that they spoke to us and the way that they spoke about Juselle's condition. There was a lot of kindness in that. And as we all know, that's much needed when you're experiencing something like this that is disappointing or that's so concerning about your child. You want the medical staff to be compassionate and to be kind in the way that they approach their care. So when we met with her surgeon, I remember she said that Juselle's jaw was small. And so because I'm a full-time Google researcher. No, I'm kidding. I just started to look at different things. Our next scheduled appointment after that was with genetics. And so cleft palates and cleft lips are often associated with other syndromes. And so what happens is they want to eliminate the possibility of another syndrome. The reason that she has a cleft lip or cleft palate is due to something else that is going on. And so they go through genetic screening to ensure that that is not the case, because then her treatment plan would change. Let's say it's not just the cleft lip and cleft palate. She also has this other syndrome that's going to impact her life in other ways as well. So that was probably top 3 nerve-wracking interactions when she went to go have her genetics screening done. But I just remember that Dr. Wood mentioned that she had a small jaw. And so as I looked online, I saw that there was a syndrome that is associated with a cleft palate, usually cleft palate only, and that's the Pierre-Robin's syndrome. And so I was really afraid that that may have been, that might be what Juselle, that might be her diagnosis. And so it also caused, Pierre Robin's also tends to cause like choking because the child's tongue is too big for their jaw. And so what happens is their tongue obstructs their breathing. And then sometimes if they have like a reflux or something, it can really like restrict it. So once like I started to look into that, I really became afraid of Giselle's reflux, but also just like driving around with her for so long in the back seat. And so every single little noise, like it would just send me into like a frenzy as I was driving. So it was just not like the healthiest situation. We went to genetic screening, and the other part of this too is that like I hated to like watch Juselle have to kind of suffer through a lot of these things. Like every single day she had to take off her clothes and be weighed, and she was poked and prodded, and there's a finger prick here, and there's an ear exam here, and just like all these like, you know, just to be new into this world and to like just like have so many people like handle you. I guess it was hard for me to have to endure as her mother. I'm talking to an audience of cleft palate, cleft lip moms, so you all know our children are so resilient. I feel like I was a nervous wreck, and Juselle would just take it like a champ. She was literally like my girl. I could even cry just thinking about how strong she is and how resilient she is. She literally never complained. I mean, you know, she doesn't talk yet, but like she didn't do much crying. She was just like always down for the ride, and she was just never like hysterical at any point or anything. It was like me the whole time that was like like a mad woman everywhere. But yeah, like she was an incredible reminder that the human spirit was stronger than anything. And so I really like delighted in watching her after the fact, because of course during that time it was really, really hard to watch her have to go through all that. And so yeah, so we did go to our genetic screening, and all day what those lab techs are doing is they're basically strapping people down and taking blood all day to look at the genetic panel. And so yeah, so they strapped her down and they took her blood, and I got the results back I think within a week. And so it was so nerve-wracking to open that, but as soon as I got it, the alert in my chart, I literally opened it so quickly, and like I needed to read, you know, what it is. And I thought to myself, well, you know, if it is Pierre Robin's, and I might not be pronouncing that right either, but someone will correct me, I'm sure. If it is PRS, then I can accept that, and we're going to be fine, and we're going to do okay. And I'm here to support her. And I was preparing for the worst, right? And hoping for the best. So yes, her genetics came back clear, and she didn't have anything. And so what they ultimately determined was that Giselle's cleft palate was an isolated incident. And what that means is the face forms in the womb between 6 and 12 weeks, I believe. And what happens is that the genetics give, you know, the instructions, right? The instructions of how to form the face and what to do next, and how to, you know, build out the human body. Well, what happened is in the womb, they started building her face, and then they just stopped. They decided to move on to something else. And so that's it. And there's no explanation of why my body did that or why her body did that. It's just something that just occurred. And so no real answers there. A question that I often, or something that I always see in just in general, like mom chats and like support groups that I've been a part of, is this feeling of guilt. And I only been asked that question one time, like, you know, do you feel guilty about Giselle's diagnosis. And I've never necessarily felt guilt, because I feel like I did everything that I could when she, during my pregnancy, or when even thereafter, to ensure that I gave birth to a healthy child. And the one thing that trips me up a little bit, though, is that they say that sometimes an isolated cleft palate can occur when there's a lack of folic acid or folate. And so, admittedly, like I said earlier in this episode, is that I hated my pregnancy and that I was throwing up a lot. And I realized that my prenatal vitamins were causing me to be nauseous. And so I stopped taking them regularly, and I switched to folate, like just folate only. And so, yeah, like I maybe that is a possibility, but the only thing that is questionable with that is that, from what I've researched and what I know, is that the face forms between 6 and 12 weeks. And I was taking my prenatal vitamins then, like on a regular basis. So, if research is correct, then it shouldn't have been because I stopped taking them, I guess. And so I don't know. And I don't know. In my case, if everything checks out the way that, what research says happens, or what we know, what studies say, right? That the face forms between 6 and 12 weeks. I was taking my prenatal vitamins. By the time I stopped, her face would have already been formed. And so I don't know. And I can't I guess be stuck on like the what ifs and that type of thing. And I guess I didn't want to make, this about me. I feel like, this is something that happened to Juselle. This is something that she is facing, and it's my job as her mother to take care of her and for her to be able to live the best quality of life that she can. And so I didn't get stuck with that feeling of guilt or anything like that. And I don't know. I just didn't. I love my daughter, and I've given her every single resource that I know to give her. And so, yeah. So after meeting with the cleft team and Dr. Wood, Giselle's surgeon, and the feeding therapist and genetics and her pediatrician and the dentist, it's so funny when the dentist saw her, she was like, does she have any teeth? And of course, she didn't have any teeth. And so they were just examining her mouth. But it's in protocol for children that are born with cleft palate or cleft lip, to see a dentist. And she also went to see her ENT as well. So after all of those appointments, Juselle was scheduled for palate repair surgery on May 22nd, 2023. And so obviously that date has passed, and so Juselle is post palate repair. So she's been repaired she's four months post-op. So, and she's been doing wonderfully. I can share details about surgery day and other things in future episodes. But yes, Dr. Wood performed her surgery in May. The ENT placed her ear tubes in her ears, because what happens is often, because they're closing that the cavity within the top of the roof of the mouth, they can have some drainage that can go into their face and then through the tubes in their ears. And so they want to make sure that Juselle doesn't struggle with ear infections or anything like that, or her hearing. One of the things that I did not know, and that I had learned throughout Giselle's journey, is that children who are born with cleft palates or cleft lips often have other issues that you may not even think about offhand. But if you cannot eat properly, then you don't tend to gain weight as well. And if you have a hole in the roof of your mouth, you often get food stuck in the roof of your mouth, which can go into your nose, which can cause infections in your ears. And when you have infections in your ears or fluid in your ears, it makes it hard for you to hear. And if you cannot hear, it will make it hard for you to speak. And so, it's just all interconnected and just things that I did not realize before I was in this situation. I didn't know that it was so complicated. I didn't know that, I even almost probably thought that the lip repair was cosmetic, but it's really not. It's not a cosmetic repair. It must be done, and for your child to have a good quality of life. So surgery day, Juselle was 10 months, and she had, the night before we had surgery, she learned how to stand up. And as you know, with any baby milestone, they want to practice it and practice it often. And so if you don't let them get it out during the day, it will disturb their sleep because they want to practice at night. And so the day before Juselle's surgery, she learned how to stand up on her own by pulling up. And so it was so hard on the night before because she didn't sleep. She was trying to stand up all night long. Because the hospital is about an hour and a half drive from our home, we decided to stay at the Ronald McDonald House, and so that we can access the hospital that morning, because Juselle's surgery was at 6:00 in the morning, which meant that we would have to be up probably about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning in order to get there on time. And so what we did was we stayed at the Ronald McDonald House in order for us to just be close to the hospital, and so that it didn't disturb us, too much in terms of sleep, and we were able to just be a little bit calmer. But things actually didn't work out that way because Juselle didn't sleep at all that night, and so it was just awful, and we weren't able to sleep that well. But she was the first patient of the day, obviously, because she is so young. And so they completed the surgery in about 2 hours. So she was under, and the hospital had a great system where they would text you live updates, the procedure has started, patient under anesthesia, that type of update. And while it was a little bit nerve-wracking, it was also just a little bit reassuring that you knew exactly what was happening during the process. Juselle had a challenging recovery because she is a thumb sucker, and because she sucks her thumb to sleep, she had a really hard time because we had to have what is called no-nos on her. And those no-nos are intended to keep her from being able to put her hands in her mouth, or anything in her mouth for that matter. And so she was frustrated because she couldn't soothe herself to sleep. Also, she was frustrated because, if I can rewind back, Dr. Wood and her team recommended that we get Juselle off of the bottle before surgery. And so we had been practicing with Juselle using a free flow cup, and she was doing very well. She was able to take from a free flow cup very well. It wasn't the cleanest or easiest thing when we did offer it to her, but it was just in preparation for surgery, because we were told that she would not be able to use the bottle post-op, and because they didn't want anything in her mouth. And so the day of surgery, once the surgery was completed, we were actually told that she could be fed through a syringe, and also that if she would take the bottle, that we could give her the bottle. Well, we tried to offer Juselle the bottle, and she did not want anything to do with it. And so what we decided was to feed Juselle through the syringe, and she was taking that, but it was rough. We spent one night in the hospital. She was discharged the next day. An additional day was really hard because she wouldn't sleep by herself, and so someone had to hold her to sleep, and it was just really challenging because obviously when there's a lack of sleep between all parties in the house. We just kind of get a little irritable. And so we all weren't getting enough sleep. And so we were all pretty cranky. But aside from that, Juselle, like the third day, she was fine. Like she literally she did so well. Like she was wanting soft foods already. And so I was just kind of giving her soups and just like noodles and stuff that would like fill her up. I don't recommend anyone to do that. Follow your doctor's orders, which is to not give them anything for 2 weeks, just liquids. And then wait until you see someone post-op to basically give you the clearance to have more or something different than the liquids. But yes, Juselle, she really bounced back really quickly and she made a full recovery at her 6-week appointment. And so we were really proud of her. She's been doing wonderful ever since. She has an upcoming appointment on October 31st. It will be a Halloween clinic. So I'm so excited to just dress her up and to see all of the other children in the clinic that are dressed up that day. So we're excited about that. But they're basically going to see Juselle for speech and to see how her speech is developing in the process. This is where they will determine if a second surgery needs to happen. And that just depends on where her tongue is falling on her palate, whether they did it too short, too long, and if they need to make some adjustments. But they will only be able to tell as she develops her speech. As I've shared through and throughout this episode, I am very excited about my baby girl's journey. I'm excited to be done with it. And I'm also like super thrilled to now be able to just help other moms. Like I know what it's like. Obviously, I've been there, and I started this podcast because I am a writer and I'm a historian of sorts, and I'm an avid podcast listener. And so I just kept on thinking to myself, I would love to create a podcast and to share knowledge. But I'm like, man, like like I have to do it on something that I'm really passionate about. Like it can't just be like another like relationship podcast or just like something that is super like cliche of what people are doing. Like it has to be something I'm really passionate about. And it just hit me. I was like, I want to do parenting. Let's do something on parenting. And then I said, oh my God, I just need to share my journey of being a mom with a child that was born with a cleft palate. And I see so many mothers that are just so concerned and so worried. And I know that feeling. People post in these support groups all day, and I can hear like the angst and the stress in their posts, like how they're feeling. Just know that I've been there and that I understand your journey. And I wanted to do this podcast because it's something that I'm passionate about, and I want people to get resources, and I want people to feel understood, and I want people to have someone to walk with in their journey. And I want you specifically to know that there's light at the end of the tunnel, and you will get past this like I have, like so many moms have. And there's so much joy in that. And it's like an honor and a pleasure to be able to host this podcast and to have this for your listening enjoyment. So just to end our episode today, I'm sure that you all will have additional questions, and that's fantastic. Please continue to listen to the episodes every week. Thank you for listening to the Cleft Mom Support Podcast. Be sure to subscribe and submit a review of the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. I hope that you have enjoyed this audio experience. Maybe you cried a little, laughed a little, but more importantly, I hope that you feel a little piece of reassurance and even joy in your journey. Talk to you next week.